Hello everyone, and welcome to our recording of our presentation on data visualization at the speed of gaming. My name is Zane Mumford, and I'm here with my coworker Tyler Gady, and we're both from Sony, or more specifically, we're from Sony Computer Entertainment America, LLC. Now, I know that's a bit of a mouthful, so let me give you a better picture of where that sits. So we're going to start with a very confusing picture of the Sony group of companies. Now, on here you're going to see several different groups that I'm sure you probably recognize. So Sony Pictures, for example, is our movie division where things like Elysium are created. Sony Music, obviously, does music, and within that we have Justin Timberlake, Carrie Underwood, Kesha, if you're into that kind of thing. You also see Sony Electronics. They make TVs, Blu-ray players, that sort of thing. And then last there on the bottom, you see our company, Sony Computer Entertainment, which is one of several Sony companies dedicated to video games. And as you can see, you have to go several layers down to finally get to Tyler and I. And I really like to think about this like getting to the chewy center of the Tootsie Pop. It's really a fantastic place to work, and we have a ton of fun. Our group Global Hosting is chartered with working with all of our different game studios to enable the online features of our amazing games. But now, before you start to think that this is going to be a really boring presentation about org charts, let me show you right quick what it is we really do. All right. Now, I'm sure that the audio on that recording probably wasn't the greatest coming over WebEx, but hopefully you get the idea. So, now that you know a little bit more about what we do and the kind of products we make, I wanted to go a little bit deeper into the introduction and give you a background on who Tyler and I are. So, this month is actually my 20th anniversary in the software industry. I started as a developer many moons ago, but I quickly realized that chasing semicolons wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I pretty quickly moved into project management and business analysis, where I've spent the majority of my career. I am not, as a disclaimer, I'm not a data warehouse person or a BI person, but I have always enjoyed working with different organizations to understand the data that we have available and how we can use that data to make better business decisions and really provide good business value. I've been with Sony for 5 years so far, and I manage a few different groups here, all of which are focused on providing IT services into our game studios. In that role, one of my main jobs is to represent the needs of the studio to IT and make sure that the services that we're delivering are in really good alignment. To be able to do that, we have to analyze tons of data and do it quickly. So whether it's making purchase decisions or analyzing new applications, we really have to make sure that the work we're doing and the money we're spending gets the biggest bang for the buck. About 3 years ago, my boss at the time introduced me to Tableau. And I do have to admit that really I wasn't that interested at first when she brought it up. But she seemed really excited about it. So one night after work, I dove into it to see what it could do, and the next thing I knew, it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I was absolutely blown away by what the product could do. Or should I say, I was tablown away. And now with that stunning wit, I'm going to pass it over to Tyler to give you a little bit of background on his experience.
Thanks, Zane. I'm Tyler Gady. I've also been in the software business for a while. I've been in software for about 11 years, but unlike Zane, I still like chasing semicolons every now and then. I've been at Sony for about 7 years. Where I started, I was working as a programmer on MAG, which, if you're not familiar with that, has the very creative subtitle, Massive Action Game. After that, I started working in project management under Zane, doing a little bit less semicolon chasing. He introduced me to Tableau after his late night stand there, and ever since then I've been doing Tableau pretty much every day since, just creating reports and wrangling data. So I don't really come from a database or BI background, but I was able to pick up on it pretty quick.
Cool. Thanks, Tyler. Okay, as you saw earlier, Sony is definitely a shell game of companies. Just within the PlayStation brand alone, we have 3 different physical companies in the different regions, one in America, one in Europe, and one in Japan. Each one of those has its own CEO, its own budgets, etc. Within that, we've created a virtual organization called Worldwide Studios, which also has its own CEO and budgets and etc. That virtual organization has representatives from those 3 different regional companies, which includes 22 individual game studios, all of which are effectively run like their own independent little operations. So obviously there's a lot of different chiefs all under the same umbrella. So when you use words like shell game and virtual matrix, you can imagine that your BI picture may not be terribly clear. So each group within our organization really focuses naturally on its own set of data. So finance will focus on finance data. There's several different studios and an in-game support team that is focused on in-game analytics. Marketing will focus on web analytics. We have a completely different company that is focused on providing transactional information from our e-commerce store that exists within the PlayStation network. Now, within all of those things, obviously, there's several of us who do work together on best practices and try to find ways, find commonality and ways to work together. We do have a central ODS and a centralized database that at least some of the groups use, quite a few of them. However, the data that's stored within there is not necessarily aligned from group to group. It's fairly segmented off. We do not have what you would consider a traditional central BI group that provides governance and alignment. There's several different central BI groups within the organization, but none that's kind of an umbrella group. Similarly, our adoption of Tableau has been very ground up and organic. So a few of us learned about it through the industry. Some of us learned about it from word of mouth, and it just kind of spread. You know, someone would see a presentation and ask where that information came from, and it's grown up over the last few years. And I'm going to go into pretty good detail later about exactly how that's happened, what our current state is, the resistance that we saw to get to that current state, and how we overcame that. Lastly, no BI presentation at a conference would be complete without hearing everyone's favorite 2 words. Anyone like to make a guess as to what those would be? Big data. Thanks, Tyler. Big data. Yes, we believe that we have big data, just like everyone else. We know there's some things that we should change in order to take advantage of that and deal with our data properly. We do have some efforts underway related to master data management and proper alignment of our data from group to group. But really, we haven't made a whole lot of changes on the ground yet. We just know that it's coming. And actually, any advice that anyone has on how we can properly make that transition, we're all ears. And now I'm going to toss it over to Tyler to talk a little bit about where our data comes from.
Thanks, Zane. Like Zane said, we deal with lots of different teams, and that leads to a variety in the data sources that we get, both in the type of data that comes in, the quantity, the size, the structure, all of that stuff varies quite a bit. So we have 4 main buckets of data that I can break it down into. So I'll talk about each one a little bit. The first one is some of the game data that comes directly from the game servers themselves. This is the coolest stuff. So some of the items that would be included in this would be, for example, MLB, the baseball game, might send all the statistics of how a player is hitting. Maybe the trajectory of the bat as they're trying to hit the ball, maybe how often they hit the ball versus strike, whatever. All the information that you would think would be useful in a baseball game. A shooter game, for example, might keep track of me as I wander around the map and get lost. It might find all the locations that I blew myself up with a grenade, or it might keep track of every place that I fell off a ledge and died. Other data that games might collect are either error or performance related, where they can keep track of frame rate maybe, or any kind of network errors they're seeing, or any other kind of just general debugging information to find technical problems, not necessarily related to design. Some of the other data that we keep track of is our infrastructure metrics. We have a lot of servers that we maintain. They're located in several data centers. So some of the data we need to keep track of is where every server is located, in which data center it's in, which rack of servers it's located on, and where in that rack it is. We also need to keep track of what operating system it's running, what kind of hardware features does it have, is it a 4-core CPU, is it an 8-core CPU, whatever. So we need to keep a full server inventory. In addition, we're starting to get data related to power consumption, so we're going to show some charts later on that, but we're just really starting to get into that kind of data. As I said, we have these servers that we use to support the video games. So what we need to be able to charge for the services that the games provide. So we have all the data that goes along with charging for these services. So we have budget projections for the titles, for the games to show them how much they should expect to pay for. We have the actual bills that we send them for how much they did use, and internally we maintain a list of the underlying cost of running the servers, so we can see how much we're charging versus how much it actually costs to run the service. And lastly, we have PlayStation Network usage data. So this is the marketing and sales data that we get from PlayStation Network Store. So all the purchases that happen, all the additional content that people buy, all the skins that people buy for Little Big Planet. We can see which ones you're buying, which ones are most popular, and we can make some business decisions based on that. So with that in mind, let's show you some of the cool things that we've been able to do with all of this data. First off, we're going to show you some slides coming from the game data. So this particular slide was written by the designers of the game Starhawk. It's a flying shooter game that came out a little over a year ago. So this one was written and used by the game designers of the game Starhawk. So on the left graph here, you can see that the home world map is quite a bit more popular than the other maps there. So as a game designer, they're very interested in this, so I'm sure after looking at these graphs, they would go back and they would look at the other maps and see why they weren't being picked as often as home world. In the middle graph, you can see that spot the outlier. Let's play the game. Can you find the weapon that was most likely to be adjusted in the next patch? That's right, it's the tank shell. So using this, they can make sure that any weapon is not necessarily more powerful than any other. And on the right here, we can see some interesting data related to the different flying modes in Starhawk. As I said, it's a flying game. So there's actually a couple different ways you can control the airplane, and what they wanted to do is make sure that each of the different ways you could fly the plane, one is normal, one is advanced, and one is arcade, and make sure that none of them are more advantageous than another. So on the bottom right there, you can see that roughly each method has the same missile scrub success rate, which is basically the missile evasion rate where you can dodge a missile. So I think the designers were happy with the way that their flight modes were designed. This is one case where we are using lots of aggregate data. So this is thousands and thousands and thousands of flights that they have tracked, and so we're able to see large trends of data here. On the next slide, we're going to dig into detail, because sometimes you see a trend in the aggregate data that you want to investigate in detail. Maybe the tank shell is getting as high damage, so you want to go see, okay, well, what's the reason for that? Let's dig deep into one particular play of data. In this one here, we're going to follow some movement data. We have these points here that we're going to be able to chart where a player, we have the data associated to where a player in a shooter game is able to, or track where they took and received damage. So this is kind of a trail of where they were actively in combat. So this is just kind of a normal player that you can see the spawn point there, the place where they enter the map is in the bottom left or in the top right. And so this player usually stays around their spawn point, sometimes jumps across to the other player's spawn point, but anyways, kind of stays around home. There's some reasons why we want to dig into a detail like this. Some of the examples might be, let's say, in the aggregate data, you see that a level is playing often, right? So maybe you'll dive in and you'll see that, okay, a lot of players are dying right at this particular point in the level, and you'll find out that, oh, it was actually kind of confusing, or maybe there's a trap door there that is a little more successful than the designers had thought. So that's one reason. Another reason is maybe players are playing it over and over again to rack up some points. And so this level, for whatever reason, was designed in a way to easily get points, so players are just replaying it for that reason. In this one here, this is an example of normal gameplay behavior. In the next slide, we'll look at another player graph. So Joe Dodson, one of our analytics engineers here in Sony, tracks player statistics for this game on a weekly basis. And on average, the maximum experience gained on that week was about 500,000. So on this particular week, he noticed that one player was getting 1.4 million. So slightly an outlier in their aggregate data. So what he did is he dug in and he looked to see what this player was doing. Now, this player played 1,000 matches in a day against the same player and won each one of them. So what do you think we have here? We have a cheater. So what we're able to do is have visual evidence that this player was cheating. As you can see, they're jumping back and forth, and they're only doing damage at the spawn points. Now, it's important to get this visual confirmation, because if you punish a player for cheating, if you ban them, then you really do have a high burden of proof to make sure that they, in fact, were cheating, and this visual evidence is very strong in making that case. And now, Zane is going to talk to us about some of the other game visualizations that we have.
Thanks, Tyler. So this example shows us how developers are taking advantage of Tableau's built-in geocoding capability. This chart shows the usage within the United States of one of our particular games. So obviously you can see quite a bit of activity down here in LA, some along the coast, not too much in the Mountain West, but then also a ton of usage on the East Coast. So different game have different profiles of usage. MLB is obviously popular in the United States, Japan, a few other places, but not so much in Europe, whereas some of our shooters are universally enjoyed. What this allows support teams like mine to do is we can drill in and see where players are coming from so that we can properly allocate our servers in our various data centers that we have placed around the world. That ensures that players get the best latency possible, which ensures the most fair and most fun gameplay. So, obviously we can dive in, drill into certain sections, do analysis. It's really pretty awesome. Similarly, on this chart, you can see how some of our developers track how the players use the game, not necessarily where they're from, but how it's being used. So in this particular example, this is multiplayer use versus single player use. So for those of you who aren't too familiar with it, the games normally, a lot of our games are created with a challenge that's just against the computer, that it's a story or something that you can walk through, but there's also an online multiplayer component where you're playing against other gamers. So a lot of times what we see, and this example bears this out, is multiplayer use will actually increase over time. So individuals will start in the single player area, they'll get familiar with their game, or they'll actually just beat the computer, the part against the computer, and then they'll look for the next challenge, which is often multiplayer. So you can see sort of the downward trend in use of single player and the upward trend in the use of multiplayer. This also lets the game teams make better decisions on where to invest their time and money and resources in building new features into the game. If after launch we see that certain features that took a long time to develop just really didn't get a lot of usage, we can back that off for the next particular version. So this next chart shows everything very clearly, and I'm sure you can all see all the little numbers in there, and they're all very important. So this one shows how the game teams are using Tableau to help with game debugging. So what we're seeing here is the number of one particular error that was seen by gamers on a day-by-day basis. So when we push out a new game, the errors that are experienced by that game often get rolled up in log files, which get aggregated, back here at Sony, and we can dive in and take a look at those. Historically, it's just tons and tons of text-based information, and it takes quite a bit of effort to dive into it. Tableau definitely helps us parse through that information so much more quickly. What this was able to do, we were able to key in on one particular error we were seeing out of the whole set and see how it was trending over time. Now, basically what happened during this time is a game team identified this as a high priority fix, got to work on this particular error, and you can see over here around towards 24th of January, a fix was pushed, and the incidence of those errors went down from about 6,000 a day practically to zero. And that shows a real specific enhancement that increased the enjoyment of our player community, and it really definitely keeps the teams linked with the gamers. Okay, now we're going to move on from our in-game data and talk about some of the infrastructure, how we've been using metrics around infrastructure to make the management of our systems much easier. So this is actually one of my favorite visualizations. I really love this one. When it comes to hosting, where Tyler and I work, our operation is what you would kind of consider sort of small to medium sized. We're definitely not huge. We're not Amazon or Rackspace. We're not a big hosting provider. But we do have a substantial number of servers, and they're spread around several different data centers. All of the information about our servers is stored in a database, and this database is many years old, and it has a tendency to get a little bit out of date, and it's kind of hard to keep up to date and keep track of. So things get a little bit messy. What Tableau has let us do here is we took a JPEG of our data center and created basically a custom geomap of each of the data centers, and we can go in at a glance and overlay the information from our tracking database to this image and click on any of the racks and see exactly what's running, which is extremely helpful. If we need to do maintenance on a rack or power down a section of the data center, we can very quickly see exactly what is going to be impacted. So it's been really powerful for the teams to be able to see this information. Where we hope to go with this next is kind of the opposite. We want to be able to click on one particular game, for example, like Tyler mentioned earlier, MLB. We click on MLB, and it would highlight on the picture everywhere that game is running in all of our different data centers, so you have a visual representation of the hosting of that particular title. It's a really cool feature. It definitely speeds up the troubleshooting that we do when we're dealing with our server side. Similarly, this is a very boring chart right now, but we hope it's a little bit more interesting soon. And I did want to leave it in just because I think it's worth mentioning. We recently gained access to power consumption data from our electric company. And we also, a few weeks back, installed smart power strips on some of our key racks that have some of our highest consumption servers. So what we soon will be able to do is click from the previous chart where you saw the individual racks into the power consumption of individual servers to really see how utilization is going up and down over time as different games are used on those systems, and we hope to be able to really get a good picture of the consumption of power and therefore utilization of our servers. So obviously not the most interesting picture today, but hopefully here pretty soon. It's a really cool way for us to link together a lot of our infrastructure information. And now I'm going to pass it back to Tyler to talk some about our how we use our infrastructure analysis combined with financials to make some awesome decisions.
Thanks, Zane. So yeah, we have this fairly large infrastructure of servers that we run here to help support the games. As you, I'm sure, are all aware, Amazon EC2 started becoming popular several years ago, and same thing for the games. They looked at it as using it for their hosting as well. And it's great because you can spin up instances, and it's very flexible, and it's easy to use. You can just create instances on the fly and discard them when you're done. And a lot of the game teams love the convenience of doing that, and rather than having physical boxes that you need to set up all the time. So we did this analysis in-house about running our own cloud. And using Tableau, we were able to show that it would be much more cost-effective to run our own cloud for the applications that we host than putting them in Amazon. Now, it doesn't work for every application. It doesn't make sense in every case, but for a lot of the cases that we have here in-house for a lot of the games that we run, it did make sense, and we were able to show that and make the business decision to buy hardware to run our cloud and save the company a whole ton of money. So this is one of the big wins that we've had with Tableau here. So we have this cloud now, but one of the things that we need to do is manage the capacity for the cloud. One of the wonderful things of using Amazon is that you don't really have to worry about capacity, but if you run your own cloud, you do need to make sure that you have enough servers for all your customers that need to use it. So we have a tool that lets us plan for the number of instances, the number of cloud servers that games plan on using going forward. And so we put that information into our tool, and we can dig down into, okay, what is Gran Turismo 6 using in December? And we can see all of the usage for December, for example, and make sure that we're planning accordingly. And we'll need to make sure that our capacity is able to support all of our projected usage here. What this does is it helps us make hardware decision purchases. If, for example, 1 month we're projected to be over capacity, then we'll need to figure out a plan. Do we buy new servers? Do we find a temporary place to burst out? Do we burst out into Amazon EC2? It enables us to make that kind of decision. So we have this plan for how many servers we plan on using, because we need to do capacity management. And this, we also have our actuals. Of course, we keep track of how many servers we are running every month and all the instances that we are running each month. So that allows us to do this. We do our how good were our projections versus the actual. Here you can see we're doing pretty good. At the start, we had some learning to do, and our projections weren't as accurate, but we're getting pretty good at doing this now. But each year and each quarter we take a look, and we look at our projections, we update them, and we get better. So we're not the only ones, on the next slide, we're not the only ones that like looking at projections. Our customers do too. So we give them projections in the form of budgets. We say your title should expect to pay this amount of money over the next year, so they can account for that in their budgeting. And they like to look at the end of the year and say, okay, you projected us to pay a certain amount. How much did we actually pay last year? And when we were able to show this to the studios in one of our annual reviews, it just blew them away. I remember we just had this chart up, and we talked for almost the whole time on this one chart, where they just dug into our budget versus actual, and they were just blown away by what we're able to do with Tableau in this. And what we're able to do with this as well is show the studios some examples of some titles that didn't plan necessarily as well as others. And what it looks like when that happens is some titles end up being more costly than others. You don't plan as well with your servers, you don't do enough testing, then right before launch, right after launch, all the servers are on fire, there's lots of debugging, there's lots of overtime, it's just a lot more expensive to fix things near launch time than it is early on. So we'll show them those charts for those certain games that we can learn from, and sure enough, we've actually gotten some positive feedback, and people do seem to respond and plan a little bit better. So on this one, we have, back on slide 21, on this one we have cost per player. So cost per player lets us show how much each title is paying per online player. An online player is, generally speaking, if someone has played the game in this month. So with this one, we can see that some games are just more expensive per player than others. There might be many reasons for that, but one of the ways that this might be helpful to a game studio is they're coming out with a new game and they're trying to decide on what kind of server topology they want. There's two main types of server topologies. There's one that's called client-server. That's where you have a bunch of servers and all the games client connect to the server and they all play through the server. The other one's called peer-to-peer, where there is no server, or there's very few minimal servers, and the PS3 clients just talk to each other. Now, client-server generally provides a better gameplay experience, but then you have the cost of running the server. So what we can do is, using these charts, is show them previous client-server games, we can show them previous peer-to-peer games, and we can say, okay, well, on average, client-server games cost, let's say, 50% more than a peer-to-peer game. And at that point, the game studio can then decide, well, do we want to pay that extra money for the smooth gameplay experience? And that's a choice for them to make, but we can now show them the data that they can make the decision. So transitioning from some of the financials, some of the other stuff that we do, we keep track of the work that we do in our ticketing system. Like many companies, what we try to do here at Sony is continually improve. And in that vein, what we do is we tag some of our work tickets with a label or a tag with CSI, which does not stand for crime scene investigation, but it does stand for continual service improvement. So we'll tag a ticket if we find out that the ticket wasn't performed in the best and optimal way. If we find room for improvement on that ticket, we'll tag it. We'll review it later on, and we'll try and figure out a way to improve it. So here we can break it down by team, by date range, to see which tickets had CSI, and we can use this for either group metric tracking or just some goals to keep getting better at the work that we do. And now Zane is going to talk about how we got to where we are. And, yeah.
Thanks, Tyler. Okay, so we've already talked about who we are and the kind of things we do, and we've now shown you how we're using Tableau to improve our business. So I'm going to go into some detail on the background of how we got here. So I'm going to start with what I consider kind of our infancy, and as I mentioned earlier, I started with Tableau about 3 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. And I'm sure that I was not the first person in Sony to use Tableau, but at that point, adoption was definitely very light. We really were able to start with data snapshots. So we'd take an Excel file, or we'd call up the BI team and ask them to pull a set of data, and we were really looking at solving specific problems. Is there one analysis that we need to do, or is there some question that we have to answer? So it wasn't like long-term report creation, it was just do this analysis or fix this problem. Once people started to see the results of some of that work, interest spread basically through word of mouth. We'd give a presentation and we'd send out an email, and someone would come up afterwards and say, that was absolutely fantastic, how did you do that, and how can I do the same thing? So that's really, this evangelism is kind of how everything started, at least within our little corner of PlayStation. We did add a small Tableau server right near the very beginning, but frankly, we didn't use it for a little bit over a year. And the primary reason was, as I mentioned, we started with static snapshots of data. And really where Tableau server shines is when you have direct database connection and your reports refresh over time. And since we didn't really have access to that kind of data at that point, we didn't have a whole lot of value in it. So we just stuck to the desktop application for probably a good year. As we continued, we wanted to really focus on getting some quick wins. At that particular time, the BI group that was in our particular organization, they were really fantastic, a really smart bunch of people, but they were just way too busy and pulled in too many different directions by the different business users in order to be able to keep up with the demand. As a result, really only the highest priority work ever got done. Where Tableau really helped us is it let us tackle some of the more medium priority things that otherwise would have just continued to sit in the backlog and we would have never gotten any traction. The first area we worked on this was related to milestone data. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the wall of text or the wall of numbers, an Excel style type chart that gets sent out. And for those of you who've been looking at it for years, a particular report that's been generated, you've been looking at it for a long time, you know where to find the information you're looking for. You just kind of hunt and find it. But really, it doesn't give you the big picture. When you're looking at all that data, you can really only find the one thing you're looking for. You can't find trends or patterns or bottlenecks or problems. One of the first things we did was we took one of those standard reports around here that everyone is familiar with and popped it into Tableau, and within a day we had this amazing Gantt chart view that we could send out, and everyone was just really impressed with how we were able to quickly see bottlenecks and dependencies within the organization that really just weren't evident prior to that. Our next step was to take these exact same milestone data and generate images from Tableau and integrate those into wiki pages for status. So at that particular time, we were managing milestone information in a lot of different places. We had multiple different systems where we're tracking dates, and we had a lot of different people updating project pages or sending out status emails, and everyone was kind of recreating dates all over the place. What this allowed us to do was we pulled all of the dates from one central location and published them out in a consistent format. So once we had this Gantt view built the way that we wanted it, we would embed the exact same pictures in all of our different emails and all of our wiki status reports, so everyone got used to seeing the same information, and it was really powerful. Where use of Tableau really took off within our organization, however, was really in the area of financials. So we do annual reviews with the studios, like Tyler mentioned earlier, and historically, those have been some of the most painful meetings. They're often very slow, and really, at the end of the day, I don't feel like either side often felt like they got the information out of the meeting that they were needing. And by either side, I mean us as the service organization or the game studios as the customer or executive stakeholder. Once we were able to put all of our planning information into one system and use Tableau as a visualization engine on the front end, it was just night and day difference. Those meetings were so much quicker. The information flow was great. We were able to answer and ask questions, and it's just night and day difference once we were able to do this. As Tyler also mentioned, in the area of financials, we've also had really good success using Tableau to do one-time analyses type things for justification of project ROI to get things done. We built our own internal cloud using a lot of data that we analyzed with Tableau, and it's saved the company a ton of money, which is great. Our next step in our infancy phase was to win over our particular organization's BI team. And when I keep referring to our BI team, and as I mentioned earlier, we don't have a central BI team. There's a lot of different groups that do it. So I just kind of wanted to reiterate that this is within our purview, our little corner of the world. This is the BI team that I'm talking about. We've historically been a Cognos shop, and basically when a nagging business user came to the overburdened BI team with a new toy and wanted them to play with it because they thought it was so awesome, obviously they didn't have time. It was not going to be the high priority item for them to dive in and look at this application. So we had to take a different approach to get some traction within the organization. We started by creating requirements documents with Tableau. So rather than just creating a Word document and handing it to the BI team on what we'd want to build, we'd actually mock it up using Tableau. We'd call them, get the static snapshot of data, formulate the report exactly the way we want it, print it out, hand it to them, and say, here, build us this. Once we were able to do that, projects got done because the requirements were clear. So it sped up the team because there was way less going back and forth since they could see exactly what we wanted them to build and what data connections we used to do it and how we joined everything up. It was really cool. Our next step was really to move to direct database connections. Now, our DBAs were pretty apprehensive. They started by limiting our access because they were concerned about performance impacts to our existing systems. So they'd limit to, say, like a 1-week snapshot of data or maybe a month. And as we started to do some of these database connections, they monitored performance and realized that nothing was going wrong, nothing broke. So slowly those restrictions have kind of evaporated, and now we just connect directly to a ton of different data sources, and we're limited only by business need now rather than by concerns about performance for the system. Lastly, what the BI team realized here is it gave them Tableau basically gave them business super users. So rather than everything falling on their shoulders to do, once Tableau was in place, people like Tyler and I, who may not be Cognos experts or may not be data warehouse experts, we could still get in and build reports and help them along, and it gave them more hands to do more things, so they could focus on the hard work like data capture, master data management, ETL type work. So it's been really a big win for them. Now, I feel like we were basically in what I call our adolescence phase with Tableau. I feel like we've hit a tipping point of interest within the organization at this point, which is really exciting. But it also comes with some problems. So one of the things that happened at first, as I mentioned, we started off of static snapshots, and then we moved to Oracle views of small sets of data, and then eventually we moved to like direct table access. So the reports that we built and published to server during that time quickly got out of date, and it was hard to keep track of what was connecting where, and things just got a mess. And then as more and more people started using the system, more things got out there, and it got even messier. So one of the first things that we did, one of the more recent things that we did was we took advantage of the upgrade opportunity when we went to Tableau 8.0. And rather than doing an upgrade, we did a completely fresh install of the application onto a different server. That let us start from a completely clean slate and get rid of a lot of the older reports and only publish those things out that we knew we could maintain. At the same time, we set up what we consider to be a tiered report management system. So we have ad hoc, standard, and enterprise level reports. If you're just doing some quick analysis or doing some testing, push anything you want out of ad hoc, no controls, doesn't matter. Once the report is ready for prime time, it needs to be moved either to the standard section or to the enterprise section. And depending upon who's going to be viewing it, how frequently, what kind of data monitoring needs to take place, what data validation needs to take place, there's SLAs that are in place for each of those different levels that determines how much work needs to go into that report before it's okay to be published to that section. Along with that, we created a wiki page that lets us track all of the metadata for all of our reports. So things like who is the requester, who's the author, what data connection does it go to, how often is it refreshed, if it's on an extract, that sort of thing. So all of that is now stored in a wiki page, so we can do a lot of searching and help us find things, and it's really helped our management of the system. One of the things we recently just completed was a transition of the management of the application out of our group's BI team to what we call our product development IT group, which, for managing the application itself makes a lot more sense for us. We're definitely still struggling to manage our licenses. Right now, each individual group kind of buys its desktop application license, but we're trying to keep the server implementation consolidated within all of PlayStation, so we just have the one server. But that's we're doing our best there. It often brings up the question of who pays for it, but IT is trying to sort of bridge that gap a little bit and do the best we can to keep that infrastructure up and going. Similarly, our BI group, their approach and some of the things that they're doing continue to morph and change a little bit. One of the things we're trying is we've recently moved some of our ETL work to a Sony company based out of Bangalore, India, and that gives us more flexibility in getting some of the back-end work done, but then Tableau helps us keep that report creation and generation very close to the business here in the regions so that we can still work very closely with our customers, which is really great. And lastly, we know that big data is coming, as I mentioned earlier. We just don't know exactly what it looks like. We have a couple projects underway, one for master data management and one for analysis of some other technologies that we might switch to, and hopefully we'll have some of that solidified by the end of the year. Now, last but not least, as much as we love Tableau and we've enjoyed our experience with it, everything does have some challenges, so we wanted to touch base on those right quick. So the first here, I already touched on a little bit. Our server growth has been challenging with the current pricing model. So what I mean by that is, if you really take a step back and look at all of Sony, I bet that we probably have enough licenses across all of Sony that would make sense to do an enterprise server implementation. But with the splintered nature of our organization, it really doesn't make sense for us. We struggle just within PlayStation alone, let alone trying to manage out all the way through all of Sony. So we're still kind of buying instances, 3 desktop licenses here and a block of 10 server licenses there, and it's still just kind of spotty. Related to that, we feel that the pricing model kind of hinders the try versus buy, and it hinders our adoption, because of a new group will see some visualizations and they'll see how fantastic it is, and someone will want to get the whole group involved, and they'll realize that they need to buy 3 or 4 or 5, something like that, desktop licenses, and maybe 30, 40 plus server licenses if they want the whole group involved, and they really get a bit of sticker shock. So it really has hindered adoption, I feel, within our organization, given the named license pricing model. One of the things that would really help us out is if Tableau would come out with a different pricing model for the server, whether concurrent usage instead of named usage, or something like daily page loads, or some other system that would really be fantastic for us.
Some of the other challenges that we have is related to the version control of our reports. And if you're having this challenge like I am, there is a session right after this that we should both go attend. But we have a lot of reports, and we don't really have a version control mechanism around it internally yet. And so that leads us to having trouble finding old versions of reports, like a report I created a year ago, someone really likes, and I can't go find that particular version. Or we're both using server and someone accidentally overwrites someone else's. So we're having that kind of issue, but I'm hoping to learn something very soon here. SharePoint. We have some data in SharePoint lists that we'd like to generate reports off of, and so far we've had some trouble doing that. So I'm sure there's some technical details that we can figure out a solution for, but it's been something that is not as easy as we hoped. And lastly, we have sometimes where I'm able to set up a crosstab, which has the perfect aggregation and the perfect filters, and it looks beautiful, and I just want to create a bar chart of that. But for some reason, whenever I try and create a bar chart, it doesn't aggregate it the same way, it doesn't filter it the same way, so what I end up having to do is create an extract of that Excel, and then create a new Tableau file off that, and then if the data changes, I have to do the whole thing again. So it's there are some cases where I'd like to have the output of one Tableau worksheet be the input of another one, but I haven't been able to get that to work right. But as much of the challenges that we do have with Tableau, obviously you saw those quick wins that we had, and some were huge within the organization. So our group is, we love Tableau, and we're going to continue to grow our use, and it's just been amazing for what we do at Sony.
Thanks, Tyler. So for this recorded session, I do want to throw a quick shout out to our other presenters. There was 4 others in addition to Tyler and myself that spent just a ton of time pulling all this together, and I really appreciate it. So Joe, Taryn, Ian and Julian, thank you very much. You can see our email addresses and Twitter handles and those kind of things there, and feel free to follow us or shoot us an email and ask us any questions you might have.
Thank you for listening to our presentation.
Thanks.